This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Napoleon of Notting Hill by G. K. Chesterton. Section 9, Book 3, Chapter 3. The Experiment of Mr. Buck. An earnest and eloquent petition was sent up to the King, signed with the names of Wilson, Barker, Buck, Swindon, and others. It urged that at the forthcoming conference to be held in His Majesty's presence, touching the final disposition of the property in Pump Street, it might be held not inconsistent with political decorum, and with the unutterable respect they entertained for His Majesty, if they appeared in ordinary morning dress, without the costume decreed for them as provost. So it happened that the company appeared at that council in frock coats, and that the King himself limited his love of ceremony to appearing, after his not unusual manner, in evening dress, with one order, in this case not the garter, but the button of the club of Old Clipper's best pals, a decoration obtained with difficulty from a halfpenny boy's paper. Thus also it happened that the only spot of colour in the room was Adam Wayne, who entered in great dignity with the great red robes and the great red sword. "We have met," said Auberon, "to decide the most arduous of modern problems. May we be successful." And he sat down gravely. Buck turned his chair a little and flung one leg over the other. "Your Majesty," he said, quite good-humouredly, "there is only one thing I can't understand, and that is why this affair is not settled in 5 minutes. Here is a small property which is worth 1,000 to us, and is not worth 100 to any one else. We offer the 1,000. It's not businesslike, I know, for we ought to get for less, and it's not reasonable, and it's not fair on us, but I'm damned if I can see why it's difficult." "The difficulty may be very simply stated," said Wayne. "You may offer 1,000,000, and it will be very difficult for you to get Pump Street." "But look here, Mr. Wayne," cried Barker, striking in with a kind of cold excitement. "Just look here. You've no right to take up a position like that. You've a right to stand out for a bigger price. But you aren't doing that. You're refusing what you and every sane man knows to be a splendid offer, simply from malice or spite. It must be malice or spite, and that kind of thing is really criminal. It's against the public good. The King's Government would be justified in forcing you." With his lean fingers spread on the table, he stared anxiously at Wayne's face, which did not move. "In forcing you it would," he repeated. "It shall," said Buck shortly, turning to the table with a jerk. "We have done our best to be decent." Wayne lifted his large eyes slowly. "Was it my Lord Buck," he inquired, "who said that the King of England shall do something?" Buck flushed and said testily, "I mean it must, it ought to. As I say, we have done our best to be generous. I defy any one to deny it. As it is, Mr. Wayne, I don't want to say a word that's uncivil. I hope it's not uncivil to say that you can be and ought to be in gaol. It is criminal to stop public works for a whim. A man might as well burn 10,000 onions in his front garden, or bring up his children to run naked in the street, as do what you say you have a right to do. People have been compelled to sell before. The King could compel you, and I hope he will." "Until he does," said Wayne calmly, "the power and government of this great nation is on my side and not yours, and I defy you to defy it." "In what sense," cried Barker, with his feverish eyes and hands, "is the government on your side?" With one ringing movement Wayne unrolled the great parchment on the table. It was decorated down the sides with wild water-colour sketches of vestrymen in crowns and wreaths. "The Charter of the Cities," he began. Buck exploded in a brutal oath and laughed. "That tomfool joke! Haven't we had enough?" "And there you sit," cried Wayne, springing erect, with a voice like a trumpet, "with no argument but to insult the King before his face." Buck rose also with blazing eyes. "I am hard to bully," he began, and the slow tones of the King struck in with incomparable gravity. "My Lord Buck, I must ask you to remember that your King is present. It is not often that he needs to protect himself among his subjects." Barker turned to him with frantic gestures. "Oh, for God's sake, don't back up the madman now," he implored. "Have your joke another time. Oh, for Heaven's sake!" "My Lord Provost of South Kensington," said King Auberon steadily, "I do not follow your remarks, which are uttered with a rapidity unusual at Court, nor do your well meant efforts to convey the rest with your fingers materially assist me. I say that my Lord Provost of North Kensington, to whom I spoke, ought not, in the presence of his sovereign, to speak disrespectfully of his sovereign's ordinances. Do you disagree?" Barker turned restlessly in his chair, and Buck cursed without speaking. The King went on in a comfortable voice: "My Lord Provost of Notting Hill, proceed." Wayne turned his blue eyes on the King, and to every one's surprise there was a look in them not of triumph, but of a certain childish distress. "I am sorry, your Majesty," he said. "I fear I was more than equally to blame with the Lord Provost of North Kensington. We were debating somewhat eagerly, and we both rose to our feet. I did so first, I am ashamed to say. The Provost of North Kensington is, therefore, comparatively innocent. I beseech your Majesty to address your rebuke chiefly, at least, to me. Mr. Buck is not innocent, for he did no doubt in the heat of the moment speak disrespectfully. But the rest of the discussion he seems to me to have conducted with great good temper." Buck looked genuinely pleased, for business men are all simple-minded, and have therefore that degree of communion with fanatics. The King, for some reason, looked for the first time in his life ashamed. "This very kind speech of the Provost of Notting Hill," began Buck pleasantly, "seems to me to show that we have at least got to a friendly footing. Now come, Mr. Wayne, £500 have been offered to you for a property you admit not to be worth 100. Well, I am a rich man, and I won't be outdone in generosity. Let us say £1,500, and have done with it, and let us shake hands." And he rose, glowing and laughing. £1,500, whispered Mr. Wilson of Bayswater. "Can we do £1,500?" "I'll stand the racket," said Buck heartily. "Mr. Wayne is a gentleman, and has spoken up for me, so I suppose the negotiations are at an end." Wayne bowed. "They are indeed at an end. I am sorry I cannot sell you the property." "What?" cried Mr. Barker, starting to his feet. "Mr. Buck has spoken correctly," said the King. I have," cried Buck, springing up also. "I said, Mr. Buck has spoken correctly," said the King. "The negotiations are at an end." All the men at the table rose to their feet. Wayne alone rose without excitement. "Have I then," he said, "your Majesty's permission to depart? I have given my last answer." "You have it," said Auberon, smiling, and not lifting his eyes from the table; and amid a dead silence the Provost of Notting Hill passed out of the room. "Well," said Wilson, turning round to Barker. "Well?" Barker shook his head desperately. "The man ought to be in an asylum," he said. "But one thing is clear. We need not bother further about him. The man can be treated as mad." "Of course," said Buck, turning to him with sombre decisiveness. "You're perfectly right, Barker. He is a good enough fellow, but he can be treated as mad. Let's put it in simple form. Go and tell any 12 men in any town, go and tell any doctor in any town, that there is a man offered £1,500 for a thing he could sell commonly for 400, and that when asked for a reason for not accepting it, he pleads the inviolate sanctity of Notting Hill, and calls it the Holy Mountain. What would they say? What more can we have on our side than the common sense of everybody? On what else do all laws rest? I'll tell you, Barker, what's better than any further discussion. Let's send in workmen on the spot to pull down Pump Street, and if old Wayne says a word, arrest him as a lunatic. That's all." Barker's eyes kindled. "I always regarded you, Buck, if you don't mind my saying so, as a very strong man. I'll follow you. So, of